All right, folks, today, real quick, we're going to talk about Jackson and this thing called the spoils system. A little picture of Jackson here on a pig, a little explanation of that as we end up going a little bit further into this. So, first question we really have to ask ourselves is who is Andrew Jackson? Kind of what makes him fit to be president in the first place? Why does he appeal to the people? What kind of characteristics do they see in him that make them want to vote for him? So the first thing, and probably one of the biggest things that actually makes him appeal to the group that he does, is that Jackson is one of the first presidents that we have that is not formally educated in any way. In any way, shape, or form. He grew up incredibly poor down in South Carolina, ended up moving in Tennessee when he becomes an orphan. So he actually receives very little formal education, if any whatsoever. So though that may be the case, he is still an intelligent individual and he's well versed in how to manage himself and how to manage other people. But when it comes right down to it, when it comes to a formal education and you compare him to people like John Adams or Thomas Jefferson, his education just doesn't quite match up. And it's kind of, I love Andrew Jackson because he always has these really fantastic quotes that encapsulate him as an individual. And there's this great quote by him that says, "It's a damn poor mind that can think of only one way to spell a word." A lot of people had made fun of the fact that he had issues spelling because he lacked that education. And so he kind of called those people out and was like, you know what? Yeah, like I don't know how to spell. But you guys are dumb because you think education is so incredibly important. Jackson just didn't think that that was the case. He thought that education was something that could be, after a period of time, knowledge could just be gained. You didn't have to have a college degree or some sort of pedigree from a very wealthy family in order to prove that you were a smart person. Another thing about Jackson, he's from the Wild Wild West, and in this case, this is actually Tennessee. That's about as far west in terms of states as the United States goes at this point. But he's from the frontier. He's kind of a rough and tough frontiersman, and people identify with that. These common individuals that now are able to vote, these Southerners that are poorer and less educated, they identify with that. They identify with living on the frontier, living with the dangers of the frontier. Jackson living a very kind of wild and crazy and dangerous life. He was a heavy drinker, a heavy gambler. He had involved himself in many duels and actually died with 2 bullets in him from duels that he had prior in his lifetime. Some other things about Jackson. We've discussed already Jackson's role in the military, specifically during the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans. So he's seen as a war hero. He's a big time celebrity within the United States. You know, they don't have movie stars back then. They don't have TV stars. They have these war heroes. And so people sit around campfires and tell the story of Andrew Jackson and his battle at New Orleans fighting against the British. And so he's a very popular individual just because of the sheer fact that he has this almost otherworldly image surrounding him as being this hero, the guy that won the War of 1812. Though we know that's not actually the case, the war had already been over, but still, Andrew Jackson is seen as this big war hero. Look at that horse, by the way. He's all bug-eyed and terrified. I would be too. Another thing about Jackson is he is not an elite by any means, or at least he does not identify with the same elitism that had existed with prior presidents. Once again, to note a few individuals: Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, James Monroe, George Washington. These guys all kind of came from wealth. They were not poor individuals at any point in their lifetime, whereas Jackson had been the exact opposite. He had been an orphan. His mother had died. His father had died in the Revolution. His brothers had died. He was a complete orphan, had no money to his name, was sent off to go live with relatives. One of the big reasons he didn't receive that formal education as a youth, one of the big reasons he got involved in the military in the first place. So he is not an elite, and therefore, because of that, these commoners identify with him. As Jackson gets older and moves on later into life, yes, he becomes a wealthy individual through plantation, agriculture, through the growth of cash crops like cotton, through slave labor, but Jackson still is going to hold to that image of not being elite, of not being someone that identifies with these prior presidents, but instead is someone that identifies with the common man, knows the struggle, knows what it's like to kind of fight tooth and nail for every single thing that you have. And here's another quote by him: "It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their own selfish purposes." Once again, Jackson kind of speaking out against those that have wealth and have power in terms of political power, saying that, these are the reasons that bad things happen. These are the reasons that the government is so corrupt, is because people, and he's specifically talking here about the corrupt bargain, the corrupt deal between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. He's talking about how negative politics are because of rich people and powerful people that get government positions. And then lastly, Jackson is a man of the people. He's a populist. He identifies with one group within the United States, this new group that can vote, these commoners in the South, with that land requirement being dropped. There's a massive population that Jackson is really going to pull in to vote for him because they identify with him. Jackson is their guy. And so he identifies as the man of the people, and he's going to push that image again and again and again and fervently throughout his entire run for the presidency. And that's why he's going to become such a popular person, because a good majority of the population within the United States can identify with this guy, can identify with his past and the things that have happened to him. A little bit about the Democratic Party and what it stands for. So whenever the corrupt deal ends up happening, Jackson separates from the Democratic Republican Party and forms his own political party called the Democratic Party. Just some of the ideals that it stands for: they want strong states' rights, they want to weaken the power of the federal government, they want the individual states to actually be more autonomous, to have more power than the federal government. Another thing that they stand for: westward migration. They want to move west as quickly as possible and as far as possible, getting all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It's what the Democratic Party wants. They want to expand as far west in as quick of a time as possible. And that's actually going to lead to this thing called the Indian Removal Act, is this desire to occupy the land and move west. And then lastly, and they kind of sugarcoat this, it's just they call it Southern ideals. What does that actually mean, though? At the end of the day, that means slavery. They stand for slavery. They stand for slave agriculture. They want to protect slavery because it's the linchpin of the South. It is what drives the Southern economy. And if the South doesn't have slavery, its economy is just going to be absolutely destroyed. And so the Democratic Party is going to really want to protect that. So, now to go on and talk about the spoils system real quick and what that is. So, let's say, just give it an example here. So, during John Quincy Adams' administration, for instance, one of the powers that the president has is the power of an appointment. He can appoint people to different federal positions within the government. So the way that it was is that you would have tons of people working for the president that had been appointed by different administrations. So like, for instance, I have here all these people that work under John Quincy Adams. A good portion of them have been appointed by like Monroe or Jefferson, and only a few had been appointed by John Quincy Adams. And so occasionally you may have someone that leaves office and then, hey, a new appointment opens up, so John Quincy Adams can appoint another individual. So that had been the way that things had gone. You had people working for the president that served in prior administrations, with only a few being replaced here and there if they chose to retire, or if they were particularly obstinate and difficult and wanted to block things that the president wanted to do. Maybe they'd be thrown out of office, but a good majority still served in prior administrations. So when Jackson ends up becoming president, he says this is absolutely ridiculous. Why is it that all of these people from prior administrations should serve and work for me? These guys aren't loyal to me. They were loyal to Jefferson or Monroe or Adams. So what he ends up doing is he says we need to make a change to this. And so he completely fires everybody appointed by prior presidents and prior administrations and appoints individuals that he thinks would do the job best. People that are loyal to him, or people that he can get to help him win more votes. He can promise someone a position in the government, like say, hey, if you vote for me and you get your colleagues to vote for me, then I'll give you a Secretary of the Treasury position or maybe another cabinet position. But in this case, even though Jackson has all of these individuals that are loyal to him working for him in government, that doesn't necessarily mean that they know exactly what it is that they're doing. You have a lot of people that are appointed that didn't serve in any sort of political office prior to being appointed. So you have people that have absolutely no idea how to do their job. You have some people that are illiterate. They have absolutely no idea how to read. They've received no formal education whatsoever. There are even stories and instances of people actually showing up, these appointees showing up to work just completely plastered out of their mind. They're just as drunk as they can be. So Andrew Jackson taking all of these people, throwing them out once he becomes president, and then appointing all of these individuals that support him and his ideas, that's called the spoils system. And that's where the phrase, to the victor goes the spoils, comes from. Since Andrew Jackson won, he has the ability to replace all of these people if he wants to, and so that's what he chooses to do, is he replaces all of these people with folks that are loyal to him and want to do some of the same things politically that he does. Just a couple of political cartoons to kind of show you the opinion of the spoils system during Jackson's administration. Here you have Jackson kind of personified as a demon, which typically is not good. If you're personified as a demon, people kind of think you're evil. He's using kind of puppet strings and all of these bribes to kind of lure people into his side to do the things that he wants to, kind of illustrating how folks will just kind of jump whenever offered any sort of bribe, including these political positions. Kind of showing off once again that Jackson is this evil being that's bribing people into office to kind of do whatever he wants them to do. Puppets in this case. Another one, just a very famous political cartoon kind of showing off Jackson and the spoils system. The phrase, to the victors belong the spoils, on the side. You have Jackson kind of farcically riding a pig, making fun of his kind of war hero image. Instead of riding a horse, riding a pig, because it's gluttonous. It eats and eats and eats. It's supposed to kind of take and take and take. You have fraud, bribery, spoils, plunder, all of these kind of negative aspects illustrating how bad the spoils system is in the views of some of these more elite in Washington. Alright, so that's it for the spoils system. We're going to pick up next video and cover Jackson and Indian removal.